Welcome to the deep dive. Let's set the scene. The stones are cold beneath Socrates' feet, and the faint light of dawn is just beginning to creep through the windows of his Athenian prison cell. The year is 399 BC.
It's a powerful image. The philosopher, condemned for impiety and, corrupting the youth, has perhaps the most important day of his life ahead of him.
The day of his execution.
Right. This is more than just a historical scene. You have to see it as the ultimate test of Socratic philosophy. There's this sacred ship which dictates the timetable for executions, and it's on its way back from Delos. The deadline has arrived.
And arriving before the sun is even fully up is Crito. He's Socrates' longtime friend, a wealthy man, and he's profoundly distressed.
And what he finds must be so jarring. He finds Socrates sleeping peacefully, which I think only makes his own fear and urgency that much worse.
Exactly. Crito isn't just bringing comfort. He's bringing a plan. A fully realized, expensive, and urgent plan for escape.
Crito's motivation is complex, isn't it? It's rooted both in this deep affection for his friend, but also a deep anxiety about public perception. He looks at Socrates and sees an unnecessary tragedy, but he's also worried, immensely worried, about what the many will say.
And that's the first friction point we really have to dig into. The source material tells us Crito fears the impending disgrace. The judgment that if they, the rich friends of Socrates fail to spring him from jail, everyone will just think they valued their money more than their friend's life.
It's a reputational fear.
A deep one. He's worried about his reputation.
And Socrates, right from the get-go, he just challenges that foundational assumption. Why should we care about the fleeting opinion of the majority? This is the instant philosophical pivot that defines the entire dialogue.
So our mission today for this deep dive, it's not to debate the fairness of his trial. We're not relitigating the apology.
No, not at all. Our mission is to perform a rigorous analysis of the moral geometry of his choice, to set aside the tears and the personal drama, and really just extract the pure, cold, logical structure of Socrates' defense of absolute obedience to the law.
Even when the law delivers an unjust sentence.
Especially then. That's the test.
It's such an uncompromising intellectual stance. The initial guiding principle Socrates asserts, which he says has been the cornerstone of his life, is that he has followed the dictates of reason only and the opinion of the one wise or skilled man.
He's basically telling Crito, if you want me to escape, you have to convince me with a better argument. He will only be swayed now by a rational argument that proves escape is the just thing to do.
So he's demanding that Crito use the Socratic method right there in the prison cell.
He is, yes.
Okay.
He refuses to allow the fear of disgrace or the immediate external consequence of death to displace the core moral principles he spent a lifetime establishing. If the principles he lived by are sound, they have to stand up now, even when they lead to his death.
Anything else would be a betrayal of his entire life's work.
A total betrayal.
So let's begin our reconstruction. If we strip away the entire dialogue, Crito's pleas, the drama of the execution, and we just synthesize Socrates' ultimate defense down to a single coherent claim, what is the executive thesis of this dialogue?
Okay, the central claim of the Crito is this. The just citizen, having voluntarily benefited from and implicitly agreed to the laws of the state, is morally bound to obey even an unjust legal judgment.
Right.
Because breaking this covenant constitutes a greater evil, destroying the basis of the state itself. And it fundamentally violates the moral principle of never returning evil for evil.
Wow. That is heavy. It places the obligation to the system, the whole structure, above the individual's right to redress a grievance, no matter how egregious that grievance is.
Exactly. It suggests that even the victim of profound state injustice has a higher moral duty to uphold the very structure that harmed them.
Which is so counterintuitive to a modern way of thinking.
It is. And to understand the weight of that claim, we have to recognize the historical and philosophical context. The Crito is directly addressing the fundamental problem of political obligation in a society that was, frankly, teetering on the brink of anarchy.
This is right after the Peloponnesian War.
Right after. Athens had just emerged from the devastating war. It had suffered under the brutal oligarchy of the 30 tyrants, and then, after democracy was restored, it executed its most prominent intellectual figure.
The atmosphere must have been toxic. Constant suspicion, shifting allegiances, a profound questioning of all authority.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The social contract was, for all intents and purposes, shattered. The great question hanging over the city was, how far does one's duty to the state extend, especially when the state itself acts unjustly?
If a court can unjustly kill Socrates, of all people, Why should anyone trust or obey the laws?
And the Crito provides a radical, almost shocking answer. Absolute obedience is the only foundation for a sustainable political life. Any other view, Socrates argues, leads to the state just dissolving, a place where the decisions of law have no power and are, in his words, trampled upon by individuals.
It really is the ultimate test of loyalty. But it's more than loyalty, isn't it? It's logic.
That's the key.
If you can ignore the laws because they were unfair to you, then anyone can ignore any law they find inconvenient. And that path, well, it only ends in chaos.
Socrates demands an uncompromising view of this social agreement. His entire argument rests on establishing that the act of escape is not merely a personal decision. It's an act of state subversion and, crucially, an act of moral corruption.
So to really get this, to grasp the meticulous precision of his argument, you're saying we need to understand the key conceptual tools he's using.
Yes, there are about 5 of them. These definitions are the building blocks of what becomes an inescapable logical cage.
All right, let's construct this essential conceptual glossary. Let's start with the very thing Crito fears. The crowd, the opinion of the many.
For Socrates, this isn't just popular opinion. It's the common, unexamined, and often, capricious views of the majority. Critically, it is defined by its inability to confer virtue or truth.
So it's not just wrong, it's irrelevant to what is right.
Morally irrelevant. The opinion of the many is incapable of true moral action. It can only inflict physical or temporary financial harm.
He completely strips their opinions of any moral weight.
He does. He asserts that while they might kill us or seize our property, and I'm quoting here, in reality they can do neither, for they cannot make a man either wise or foolish, and whatever they do is the result of chance.
That's an incredible statement.
It is. Their view is like an untrained mob trying to critique a world-class athlete. Their cheers or their jeers, they matter nothing to the athlete's actual skill. They can harm the body, Socrates says, but not the soul.
Which brings us to what truly matters for him. Concept number 2, the good life, or the just and honorable life.
This is the Socratic constant. It's the North Star. The good life is the moral standard by which all actions must be judged. It's the life guided by reason and truth, and it's completely independent of external circumstance or fate or popular opinion.
Right. He gets Crito to agree on this.
He does. He asks him, not life, but a good life is to be chiefly valued. And a good life is equivalent to a just and honorable one. This term sets the entire stakes of the dialogue. If escaping requires him to live an unjust life, then the extra years he might gain are completely worthless.
And the instrument for maintaining that quality of life, for protecting it, is the next concept, number 3, the principle in us, which we would call the soul.
Yes, the soul. This is the moral core that has to be protected at all costs. Socrates uses this highly relatable analogy of physical training. He says if an athlete destroys his body through poor training or by neglecting the skilled trainer's advice, then that life is ruined. It's not worth living.
So he's saying the same is true for the soul.
Exactly, but even more so. The soul, that higher part of man, is improved by justice, and it is deteriorated, corrupted by injustice. And he says it is far more valuable than the body.
So the fundamental Socratic insight here is that when you commit an injustice, you're actually harming yourself. You corrupt your own soul far more than you harm your victim.
That is the definition of true ruin for him.
Yeah.
Self-inflicted moral ruin.
This moves us into the political realm then. The philosophical cage is built on this moral architecture of the soul, but the political mechanism is this personification of, number 4, the laws. Why does he do that? Why make them a living, speaking entity?
It's an incredibly powerful rhetorical move. The laws, the nomoi, are a device representing the entire legal structure and governance of Athens. It's not just a single statute, but the collective coherent system.
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
And by personifying them, Socrates can grant them a single voice that speaks with moral authority. A voice that contrasts sharply with the confused, capricious voice of the many, the very people Crito fears.
So this voice acts as a parent, a master, a moral authority.
Yes. And it demands that Socrates address the state as a unitary moral agent, not just a fragmented assembly of unjust judges who happen to condemn him.
Okay. And that brings us to the binding mechanism for that relationship. The final concept, number 5, the implied contract or agreement.
This is the unwritten covenant, the one the citizen forms simply by choosing residency. Socrates remained in Athens for 70 years. He had children there. He enjoyed its protections. And this is crucial. He explicitly refused exile, even when he was offered the chance during his trial.
That chose to stay.
He actively chose it again and again. He argues that by living in Athens and enjoying its benefits, like education, security, the framework for marriage, he formed a tacit promise to obey the law's commands or, and this is the only alternative, persuade them otherwise.
Then he always had the option to leave.
He had a constant alternative. He could have left at any time. His choice to stay solidifies that contract over an entire lifetime.
Okay, with those 5 concepts defined, we can now really systematically break down Socrates' defense into the 2 distinct, numbered logical arguments.
Yes. The first argument establishes the foundational ethical bedrock, and then the second one applies that principle directly to the political consequences of escaping.
Let's start with that bedrock then. The ethical core that Socrates insists he and Crito have always shared. Let's call it argument chain 1, the principle of non-retaliation.
This chain is designed to be undeniable.
Yeah.
Socrates uses his method to lead Crito through a series of yes or no questions, basically forcing him to accept the premises based on their shared ethical life.
So what's premise 1?
P1 is simple. We must never intentionally do wrong or injure anyone. Socrates asserts this as a universally accepted principle among all moral people. He asks Crito, then we must do no wrong. And Crito says, certainly not.
Seems straightforward enough. What's P2?
P2, injuring in return. So retaliation, rendering evil for evil, is the same as doing wrong or injuring, regardless of what you suffered first.
So 2 wrongs don't make a right.
In the strongest possible sense, Socrates asks, nor when injure in return, as the many imagine, for we must injure no one at all. And again, Crito has to agree, clearly not.
Okay, so P3 must be where he connects this to the escape.
Exactly. P3, the escape, which involves disobeying the judgment of the court, is an intentional act of injury against the laws. Because the laws are a unified moral entity, breaking them damages the entire state.
And that leads to the conclusion.
The conclusion C is inescapable. Therefore, we ought not to retaliate or render evil for evil to anyone, whatever evil we may have suffered from him. Escaping is an act of retaliation against the laws for the unjust sentence delivered by the men who applied those laws. So it must be avoided.
The power of this is that he just shifts the entire focus. Crito only sees the suffering of the injustice, the death sentence. But Socrates forces him to see the doing of an injustice, the corruption of his own soul through the act of escape.
Exactly right. Socrates emphasizes that while the many believe that evil should be returned for evil, that retaliation is justified, this is the opinion of the multitude. And they already agreed that's irrelevant.
Right, the opinion of the untrained.
The untrained. If Socrates escapes, he is adopting the very ethical standard he spent his entire life fighting against. He would become a moral hypocrite, destroying his soul, the most valuable part of him, just to save his body.
And it's so crucial that the unjust sentence was delivered by the court, by the men. The act of escaping is an injury to the laws themselves, which Socrates holds responsible for his entire existence.
Yes, which has to lead us into the political argument. He has to connect that ethical violation to the system itself.
Right, so let's move to argument chain 2, the social contract and filial duty. This is the political core.
Indeed. Socrates has proved that the laws themselves deserve absolute obedience, despite the failure of the court to apply them justly. The setup is this fundamental premise. Ought a man to do what he admits to be right, or ought he to betray the right? Since escape is retaliation, from chain 1, it is a betrayal unless proven otherwise.
Okay, so what's the first premise of the second chain?
P1 is filial duty and debt. The laws are the citizen's parent and master. They provided the structure for his birth, his nurture, his education, his protection for 70 years. This relationship is asymmetrical.
Parent and master. Strong words.
Very. The laws enabled his father to marry his mother, and they oversaw his schooling. He owes his very identity as an Athenian to them.
All right, P2.
P2 is subversion. Breaking the law, even a single law by a single person like Socrates, is an act that attempts to overturn the entire state's foundation by asserting the lack of legal authority. The laws challenge him directly. They ask, are you not going by an act of yours to overturn us, the laws, and the whole state as far as in you lies?
It's not just about him anymore. It's about the survival of the state.
He's making it about that, which leads to P3, implied consent. Socrates had the alternative of persuading the laws, arguing in court, or leaving the state entirely. His choice to stay in Athens for 70 years, to have children there, to rarely travel, constitutes an absolute, implicit, and voluntary agreement to obey the law's commands.
He voted with his feet by not moving his feet.
For 7 decades, yes. And that brings us to P4, the alternative. The citizen always retains the right to persuade the laws that their command is unjust.
Which he tried to do.
He tried at his trial. Socrates, having failed to persuade the court and the jury, has exhausted his option. Therefore, he must obey the resulting sentence.
And so the conclusion of this second argument chain.
C. Therefore, escaping against the will of the Athenians is breaking sacred covenants, injuring the laws who are like parents and masters, and attempting to destroy the state. Such an act is profoundly unjust, regardless of the personal cost of obedience.
That is such a rigorous closed loop. It's a philosophical trap. By agreeing that he must never injure anyone in chain 1, and then agreeing that the laws are his parent and master in chain 2, Socrates just locks Crito into the conclusion that escape is the ultimate injustice.
What's fascinating here, and you touched on it earlier, is that Socrates explicitly acknowledges the injustice of the verdict. He knows he is suffering evil from the men who applied the law.
Right. Separates the people from the system.
He has to. The core commitment of the Crito is that one must distinguish between the flawed application of the law by men and the fundamental integrity of the law itself. To break the law due to the fault of the men is to punish the entire structure for the mistake of its individual parts.
And this raises that important question that, modern readers constantly grapple with. Socrates had this divine mission, as he often stated, to teach and improve the youth. Wasn't that a higher duty? Couldn't he argue that justified escape?
That's a crucial point, and Socrates addresses it indirectly in P4. The law recognizes the citizen's right to persuade them that the command is wrong. Socrates tried to persuade the jury during the trial, and he failed. His commitment to his divine mission, his teaching, required him to operate within the state framework as long as he chose to live there.
So having failed to persuade the state to let him continue his mission,
he cannot then violate the very structure that gave him the platform for that mission in the first place. This sets up a profound tension we need to explore later, the tension between pure principle and, well, practical utility.
All right, so let's move to that. To really understand this, we need to focus now on the most dense and, I think, crucial passage in the entire text. It's the moment where he fundamentally redefines the relationship between the citizen and the state.
Yes. It moves it far beyond any simple contractual agreement. It's where the laws confront Socrates directly and use that parent-child, master-slave analogy.
This passage is where the concept of the asymmetry of obligation is really established. It replaces this modern idea of equal parties negotiating a contract. It's the absolute core of the political argument.
Let's look at the central assertion of the laws, where they establish their authority. I'll quote it. They say to Socrates, "Well then, since you were brought into the world and nurtured and educated by us, can you deny in the first place that you are our child and slave, as your fathers were before you? And if this is true, you are not on equal terms with us, nor can you think that you have a right to do to us what we are doing to you. Would you have any right to strike or revile or do any other evil to your father or your master? And because we think right to destroy you, do you think that you have any right to destroy us in return and your country as far as in you lies?"
The inclusion of the word slave there, even in the ancient context alongside child, is incredibly jarring to a modern ear. But it hammers home the idea that the citizen's debt to the laws is absolute and non-negotiable.
It does. And the plain English explanation is this. This relationship is not one of equal parties in a modern contract where if one side breaches, the other is free to walk away. Not at all. It is a relationship founded on gratitude and debt.
So the laws are not just a rule book.
No, they are a constitutive force. They are the very condition of possibility for Socrates' existence. They provided the framework of marriage, of education, of citizenship that created Socrates the philosopher in the first place.
So because the laws literally define the life he had, he is forever indebted to them. And a child cannot justly strike a parent, even if the parent acts unjustly, because the parent provided the very framework for the child's existence. That debt is too profound to be undone by a single act of injustice.
Precisely. Socrates accepted the whole package. He enjoyed the immense benefits, the nurture, the education, the freedom to speak for 70 years. He is therefore obliged to accept the corresponding evils, even the unjust sentence, because violating the contract to save himself would be an attempt to sever the root that sustained his entire moral and intellectual life.
We should try to make this fundamental asymmetry tangible for the listener. Let's bring back that idea you mentioned, the analogy of a highly successful musician and a state-funded music academy.
Yes, that works well. So imagine this renowned musician, an innovator, a profound cultural figure. And their entire skill set, their technique, their platform, it was all developed and funded by a prestigious state-backed music academy from the time they were a small child. The academy is the reason they exist as an artist.
Okay, so decades later, the musician is incredibly wealthy and famous. But due to some internal corruption, the Academy's new leadership issues a completely fraudulent and unjust legal judgment against them. They demand, say, a confiscatory tax or some disproportionate claim on their future work.
The musician could easily flee the country, find a rich patron in London or Rome, and continue their work completely unscathed. They would escape the unjust judgment. But according to the Socratic view, this act of escape is profoundly wrong.
Let's map the concepts. Who is the parent master in this scenario?
The academy itself, personifying the collective legal and structural support of the state, is the entity that nurtured their genius and gave them the condition of possibility for their success. It's their parent.
In the implied contract.
The musicians stayed. They didn't leave when they turned 18. They accepted the scholarships, they used the facilities, they benefited from the brand recognition for decades. They implicitly agreed to abide by the Academy's authority or to persuade the Academy to change its demands.
And the escape. It saves their assets, but it is an act of injury and subversion.
It is the ultimate injury. The musician is basically saying, my principles, or rather my ability to keep my money, are more important than the integrity of the institution that created me. That musician owes their very essence, their skill, their fame, their platform, to that foundational structure.
So, by abandoning it over an unfair ruling.
They are symbolically rejecting the very process that created them. They are attempting to destroy the laws, as far as in them lies.
The beauty of the analogy is that the musician's unjust situation, their unjust condemnation by these corrupt leaders, it doesn't negate the decades of nurture and benefit. The debt remains.
And that debt, for Socrates, is a debt to justice itself, because the laws, at their core, are the mechanism for justice. To destroy the mechanism is to destroy the possibility of justice for everyone else in the state. Socrates cannot choose individual self-preservation over the integrity of the state's foundation.
Okay, so Socrates understands that Crito is driven by these very pragmatic fears. Fear of disgrace, fear of death, fear for his children. So Socrates and the laws, they don't rest entirely on abstract principle. They also go on to dismantle Crito's pragmatic case.
They do. They show that seeking life over justice is completely self-defeating. It leads to a morally bankrupt life. The laws issue 4 devastating warnings about the outcome of escape, proving that the life Socrates saves would not be a good life at all, but a discreditable, humiliating, and ultimately unjust one.
Let's start with the immediate fallout then, the danger to friends.
We have to remember Crito is the one arranging the escape. The laws point out immediately that Crito and the other friends who help will face massive risks. They will be exiled, lose their property, be subject to constant trouble from informers.
So Socrates' act of saving himself is, in practical terms, an act of injury toward his dearest allies.
Who would suffer great legal and financial consequences. If his goal is to prevent harm, he starts by harming his friends.
That violates chain 1 immediately. We must never intentionally do wrong or injure anyone.
Right out of the gate.
Next, where would Socrates even go? The laws warn him about his external reception in other states.
This is a powerful rhetorical move. In any genuinely well-ordered, principled state, he mentions Thebes or Megara, which were known for having sound laws. Socrates will not be welcomed as a hero. He will be seen as an enemy, a subverter of the laws.
And worse, a man who corrupted the law-abiding portion of his fellow citizens.
Exactly. His escape would ironically confirm the judgment of his Athenian prosecutors in the eyes of foreign judges. Why would a law-abiding state welcome a man who demonstrated he is willing to destroy the very laws he lived under simply because they were temporarily inconvenient?
They wouldn't. He would instantly forfeit all his moral authority. His identity as a truth seeker, as a teacher, is inseparable from his commitment to principled action.
It is. His credibility would be gone.
And what about the other option? Fleeing to a land of great disorder and license, like Thessaly, where Crito has connections. The laws reserve their most cutting critique for this option, the loss of dignity.
This is the ultimate degradation. If Socrates goes to lawless Thessaly, he will be forced to live as a flatterer just to get a dinner. He would spend his final years charming, rich, ignorant foreigners, engaging in trivial conversation just to secure his next meal.
So he gives up his lifelong sentiments about virtue and justice.
And becomes a pathetic old runaway. He would be trading his moral consistency for base necessity.
The laws say his story will become an unseemly narrative and a ludicrous tale of an old man violating sacred laws from a miserable desire of a little more life.
The life he is saving is already morally ruined by the very act of saving it. That life would no longer be a good life. It would be a life of humiliation, contradiction, and moral compromise, the very antithesis of everything Socrates preached.
Okay, but what about Crito's final desperate plea? The parental duty. That Socrates must escape for the sake of his children, to nurture and educate them. How does Socrates address this profound obligation?
He flips the charge of betrayal right back onto Crito's plan. Socrates questions whether taking his children to a lawless land like Thessaly, depriving them of Athenian citizenship and a proper principled education, is truly the best thing for them.
So he's saying true fatherhood is about the values you pass on, not just your physical presence.
Precisely. He argues that if his friends are truly virtuous, they will care for the children whether he is alive and absent in Thessaly or dead and martyred in Athens. By choosing to corrupt his soul and violate his principles, Socrates argues he leaves his children the worst possible inheritance, a legacy of hypocrisy.
If he is dead, he leaves them the inheritance of a man of principle who suffered injustice. If he escapes, he leaves them the inheritance of a man who taught virtue but acted with vice.
That is the core distinction. He can depart as an innocent sufferer and not a doer of evil, a victim of men, preserving his eternal moral integrity. And this all leads up to the final spiritual threat.
The laws in the underworld.
Yes, the laws reiterate their final exhortation. Think not of life and children first, and of justice afterwards, but of justice first. If Socrates escapes, he is returning evil for evil and breaking his covenants. The consequence isn't just social shame, but eternal damnation.
The living laws will be angry with him.
And their brethren, the laws in the world below, will receive him as an enemy. This is the ultimate inescapable consequence. The stain upon his soul is permanent, extending beyond the grave.
And so we arrive at the absolute final refusal. Crito, having had every emotional and pragmatic argument just systematically dismantled and replaced with Socratic logic, is rendered speechless.
Socrates concludes by stating that Crito's words are useless because the voice of the laws murmurs in his ears like the sound of the flute in the ears of the mystic. It is a divine, overwhelming harmony that supersedes all earthly noise.
It's beyond argument at that point.
It is. He is unwavering in his commitment to principle and will fulfill the will of God and to follow whither he leads. His decision is now final, resting on the foundation of a lifetime's reasoned commitment.
Crito's final line is just, "I have nothing to say, Socrates. The logic is flawless, the moral architecture complete. He's been defeated."
Utterly.
So this deep dive into the Crito provides a stark, rigorous definition of political obligation. For you, the listener, the essential takeaway is that for Socrates, the integrity of one's moral principles, never injure, never retaliate, and the maintenance of the state's foundation, obey the implied contract, these things supersede the value of biological life itself.
Especially when that life requires an unjust act to preserve it. It forces you to ask, what is the value of your soul versus the value of your body? Socrates places the soul's integrity infinitely higher.
And when we look at modern political friction, from civil disobedience movements to questions of required legal compliance,
The Crito doesn't give us comfort,
Mhm.
but it demands intellectual precision. If the foundation of the state is dependent on absolute obedience, then any act of civil disobedience, no matter how righteous the cause, is inherently framed as an act of trying to destroy the entire structure. That's the Socratic view.
The decision he made was the ultimate test. He was willing to die for his ideas, confirming that his philosophy was not just abstract theory, but a guide for life, and crucially, a guide for death.
But here's where the tension truly lies, and this builds on the concepts we explored. We established that Socrates chose a principled death over a discreditable life as a fugitive. Yet throughout his life, Socrates repeatedly asserted that his greatest good, his divine mission, was to teach, to improve the youth, to encourage critical thought.
Right, so if his purpose was to do moral good for mankind, the ongoing utility of his existence, the extra decades of teaching he might have done in exile, seems like a very high value. He could have chosen a longer life, however less dignified, where he continued to challenge minds, arguably doing more overall good than one final, glorious act of compliance.
So is it truly just for him to choose a glorious, unblemished death preserving the pure principle over a longer, less dignified life in exile, where he might have continued to perform vital moral and educational work? This is the ultimate philosophical choice the Crito presents to us. It's about weighing the value of pure, uncompromised principle against the value of ongoing moral utility.
It's a debate that demands careful consideration, especially for those of us navigating the complex waters of individual conscience versus collective obligation.
A very real and present tension.
Ponder that trade-off, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.